Barber is a best-selling author and founder of Lighthouse Catholic Media. Jesse Romero is a retired law enforcement officer, a former kickboxing champion with a master's degree in theology. And together, they share a passion for evangelization and PhDs in common sense. You're listening to The Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio. To join the show, call 888-914-9149. Here's Terry and Jesse.
Thank you very much. It's Terry Barber. Jess Romero is out on a mission at a parish this weekend. I'm not alone. I have my guardian angel. Also, Dr. Ed Mazza, who the professor from Azusa Pacific, will be calling in because we're going to be talking about two separate priests. One, Padre Pio, and that's the one I really want to focus on. It's his feast day tomorrow. Yes, who was Padre Pio? Wow, what a great saint of the church. Padre Pio, and before I actually tell you about Padre Pio, get yourself a cup of coffee or hot tea and relax. If you're driving, pay attention to the road. But I want to inspire you on the life of Padre Pio because he's one of my favorite saints. And later today, I've got a special call-in coming in a few minutes from one of our good Catholic schools that sponsors the Terry and Jesse Show. Wait till you hear this. This is going to be exciting. But Padre Pio was born May 25th, 1987. He died in September of 1968. So really, he's a modern-day saint because I was 12 years old when I actually saw not a video. They didn't have videos back when I was 12. A 16-millimeter film. One of our parish priests brought this to our home in our backyard, and there were 150 people in our yard, and I was 12 years old, and they showed this film on the life of Padre Pio. I was blown away by it. I didn't ever heard of the word stigmata. What the heck was that? This man had the wounds of Christ. He bilocated. In other words, he could be in two places at one time. He elevated off the air. He did all kinds of miraculous things. He was an amazing priest. And I'll just tell you one amazing story that I heard. And it's documented. The little girl's still alive. She was born blind without pupils. She couldn't see, right? Padre Pio performed a miracle, and this woman could see without pupils. Now, how does that work? Talk to your ophthalmologist. I have no idea. But God can perform miracles through these saints, and Padre Pio was one of those. And later, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the letters that he wrote for advice. Wow, he had some powerful advice. Here's one that I think you could take home tonight. He said in a letter, on letter 8, page 97 of this book, it says, never lie down to sleep without having first examined your conscience on the way you have spent the day, without turning your thoughts to God. Then offer and consecrate your whole person, that of every Christian. So it's a morning offering. You know, you go to sleep and you get up, you offer it all to God. He's got so many great advances, or ideas of how to live the Christ-centered life. I brought in an expert, and I mean an expert on history. You've heard him before, Dr. Ed Mazza from the University of Azusa Pacific here in Southern California. Dr. Ed, are you here with the Terry and Jesse Show?
Terry, I'm here. I'm very happy to be talking about this great Italian saint, Padre Pio, because life's too short not to be Italian.
I was just going to say, with this name Mazza, that's got to be Italian. But Dr. Ed,
well, it's either Italian or Jewish.
Is that right? Is that right? I didn't realize it could be Jewish, huh? Dr. Ed, knowing history, this is relatively new history because he really died just in 1968. And I mentioned that he had the stigmata. And Dr. Ed, you know a little bit about this saint. And he always he had a lot of struggles in life, even where people falsely accused him of things. Can you kind of tell our listeners a little bit about Padre Pio and the man and his work in Italy especially during World War II? I think that's fascinating.
God offered Padre Pio the opportunity to suffer with Christ in a very poignant way, not only physically with his 5 wounds, but spiritually, the kind of abandonment and the kind of attacks from others. And this is really fascinating stuff. There were actually men of the church who were out to get Padre Pio, who were jealous of him because thousands of people would come to this little monastery in the middle of nowhere because he had the wounds of Christ and because he was such a great spiritual director. And I guess they were, jealous of all the attention he was getting. So this one priest, Lord rest his soul, Gagliardi, he went to Rome and denounced Padre Pio. And this is what he said. He said, Padre Pio is demon-possessed. I declare to you that he has a devil. I think one of my former students complained in the same way about me. And he says that, moreover, then they made up all kind of crazy stuff that he couldn't possibly have done.
Right.
And that he was causing fist fights among the friars. Can you imagine Franciscan friars having fist fights? But through it all, what Padre Pio did was he just remained obedient to his superiors, and they were thinking of having him transferred to another monastery. And for his part, Padre Pio was willing to go along with that. Padre Pio said, if my superiors order me to jump out the window, I'll jump out the window.
Holy obedience.
But, exactly. What was I going to say? I was going to say that a very funny incident happened because there were a lot of people outside who were, taking little bits and pieces of his clothes and from his beard, and they were trying to get any physical attachment they could get from him. They wanted to get from him, and then some people were actually hawking relics of him, first-class relics. And Padre Pio was in his rectory one time, and he could hear outside some guy was yelling, "Padre Pio for 2 cents! Padre Pio for 2 cents!" I mean, he's selling these little relics. I guess back in the 1920s, 2 cents was worth more.
When people tell me things like, "Oh man, you must be great," I say, "Talk to my wife. You'll find out all about me." It's not true. My point to you is Padre Pio was a humble man, Dr. Ed, and he had a great zeal for souls. And is it true, Dr. Ed, that his confessional line was so long, people were coming from all over the country and even all over the world? Is that a fair statement to say that about people coming to confession to Padre Pio?
The lines were so long, Terry, that the man spent anywhere between 12 to 18 hours of his day just in the confessional. Now remember, he got up at 2:30 in the morning to get ready for prayers, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning he would say Mass, because in 1923 the Vatican actually prohibited him from having public masses, and then when they relented on that and allowed him to have public masses again, it had to be as early in the morning as possible. So he would pray the Mass at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then when he was allowed to have confessions again, he was in the confessional all day. So when did he sleep?
Yeah, really.
When did he eat?
Yeah. Amazing. Dr. Ed, Padre Pio is a man of our times, and I'll tell people a little later. I'm going to tell it now. This is amazing. He actually had a zeal for fallen away Catholics, and he said that many times, and I'll give you a personal story. I was at his canonization back in June of 2002, and by golly, I was so impressed at the canonization. I was moved. And then we went to San Giovanni Rotondo, where he spent 50 years as a monk there. And while we were there, I ran out of money. Well, that's what happened with 4 kids and a wife, right? So we had to go to the bank and get some more lira with our credit card. And so my wife was generous enough to wait in line while I watched the kids. Well, most people were talking in Italian, but I overheard somebody talking in English. And I said, you speak English, so do I. Where are you from? He says, I'm from England. And I said, well, what brought you to San Giovanni Rotondo? He says, well, you really want to know? I said, yeah, tell me. He says, well, I was a fallen away Catholic for years, and by golly, I would be away from the church, and on this one day back in 84, remember Padre Pio died in 69, so years later, he says, I'm on a train going back home from work, and this monk is trying to tell me to go to confession. And I said, no way, Padre, lay off. And this monk says, well, you have the freedom to say no or to say yes, but you need to go to confession. So he said, later, I'm not interested. He goes back home, turns on the TV on public television, and there's a 1-hour special on the life of Padre Pio. And when he saw that, he said, that's the monk that saw me that I talked to on the train today. How could that be? The guy says that he died in 68. But it says that he had a great love for people who had been away from the church, and he would be bold and ask people to go to confession, like me. Freaked him out. He wouldn't even go to work the next day. Oh, here's what happened. I think the break's going to interrupt it, so you're going to have to hear it on the other side. But here's what happened. While he was just amazed by this, his wife says, well, why don't you go to work, honey? Well, I don't know. I can't. I'm just, no, there's a reason. And then the wife gets the story from her husband that he thinks he met Padre Pio, who died in 1968, and this is 1984, and he's trying to get me to go to confession. The wife says, go to confession. The guy goes to confession. He's back in the good graces of the church. And by golly, he said, I made a promise to start Padre Pio prayer groups up and down England, and that's why I'm here at this canonization. My mouth dropped. I said, I'm going to put that in my book on evangelization. That's amazing. Folks, I'm giving away a DVD called Fire of Evangelization in your parish. How to give your testimony, how to share your faith. It's free. You just pay the shipping. Call 877-526-2151. When we come back, I've got a special call from one of the Catholic school teachers and the principal. Wait till you hear this. You won't want to miss it. We'll be right back.
For today's giveaway, call 877-526-2151. Back to the Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio. Want to join the conversation? Call 888-914-9149. Here's Terry and Jesse.
Thank you very much. Pour yourself a little bit more coffee or tea. I promised I'd have a call coming from one of our local Catholic schools that sponsor the Terry and Jesse Show. We have St. Joseph's Parish in La Puente. They have a wonderful parochial school. I really endorse that school. The Carmelite sisters used to teach there. That's when I first met them. But I have Mark Padilla, one of the teachers, here on the line. Mark, welcome to the Terry and Jesse Show.
Hey,
hello, Mark.
How you doing?
I'm too blessed to be stressed, brother, but I love talking to you because you're an on-fire Catholic, and I understand you're a teacher at a wonderful school at St. Joseph's Parish in La Puente. Is that correct?
That is correct, Terry. God has blessed me to be here with the 6th grade students here at St. Joseph's. Let's hear it, guys.
Well, God bless all of you. God bless you all. Well, Mark, I want to understand how important Catholic education is for our kids, and I know you are an on-fire Catholic, and you just started teaching there. Tell us a little bit about your school.
Well, St. Joseph is here in La Puente, which is, of course, we're in the shadow here of the great Catholic school, Bishop Amon, and many of our students do go there. So we're very blessed that day in and day out, we can talk about Jesus Christ here in our classroom.
Wonderful. And is the principal here in the room where we could talk to her, possibly? Is that a possibility?
Yes. So I've got Mrs. Rosa. She's our principal, and she's going to talk a little bit more about our school and what we have to offer.
Well, I want to hear it, and so do our listeners. Mrs. Rojas, it's on. You're on. Welcome to the show. God bless you. Yeah.
Hi.
Tell us about
you as well. My name.
Thank you. Yes. Tell us about.
Yeah. My name's Diana Rosa. I'm the principal here at St. Joseph's School with our parish pastor, Father Matthew Cumberland. And thank you so much for having me on. We've been faithfully serving here in the La Puente community for about 67 years. And a lot of our students are second and third generation families, and they're very connected to our St. Joseph Parish. And we've been trying to impact the lives of our students and their families. We are very tight with our community here. Many of the people that live here in the La Puente community either know someone who's graduated from our school or has actually attended. One of the foundations that we have here at our school is just really living out our Catholic faith.
Awesome.
It's great to be part of a school where we can, come together in unity, working with our parents and working with our kids in the classroom to really just focus on their faith formation and just really helping them, not just for today, but for their futures as well.
That is beautiful. I'm going to give the students, if they can hear me, some advice where I go all over the country talking to young people. All of the young, sixth graders, everybody in the school, please do this one thing. Every single day, ask Jesus Christ for more faith. If you do that, your faith will grow. And I'm just delighted that the school is so centered on Christ and teaching the children about the Eucharist, about Our Lady. I've seen it in action there, and I want to endorse that school, that if someone is thinking about sending their kids to a parochial school, this is a good one to send. How can somebody contact you if they have a need for bringing their children to your school? How does that work?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. So they can visit our school website to get to know our school a little bit more at stjosephschoollt.org, or they can contact us directly. They can find our telephone number on the website as well, but they can reach us at 626-336-2821, and we can connect them with our secretary to help them fill out the application. But I do want to say, too, that we do offer tuition assistance for families that are interested in attending our school. I know one of the biggest things is making sure that we provide scholarships for our families that are in need, and we definitely put that in the forefront of what we do here at our school. We want everyone to experience a Catholic education.
Me too, and thank you for sharing all this. Mark Padilla, your teacher there, I know him personally for years, and I'll tell you what, you can't have a finer teacher there. This man's on fire for the faith. Thank you for sharing your information about your school. And again, this is St. Joseph's Parish in La Puente. And folks, I would encourage you to check out their website and consider sending your daughter or your son to this school. Thanks again for joining us here on the Terry and Jesse Show.
Well, Terry, so I just want to say a couple more things.
Sure.
So we've been fortunate to have Bishop O'Connell come over to the school and do Mass for the kids. He came and did a retreat for the teachers here, and what he's asked us to do with the kids, we are doing. So he's asked to do meditation. So with my class, we meditate and we pray to Jesus doing that. He has asked us to do the gospel reflection for this upcoming Sunday, and we do that, and the kids take that home to their families, and they share with their families the message of Jesus Christ and the gospel. So Bishop O'Connell has really been integral to who we are as our shepherd, our local shepherd, and we are doing as asked us here in the classroom. So we do want to give you a little treat and end with something that we get to do here, and is we get to sing. We get to sing good Catholic songs, and as taught us here on the radio, singing is like praying twice, right? What St. Augustine said. So the kids want to sing for you real quick. So
go ahead.
Let's hear from our really the stars of our school here. Ready, guys? Go.
Here I am, Lord, in thy Lord. I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me.
Beautiful,
the question is, Terry, is for the parents out there, are they being called to send their children to Catholic school? And I firmly believe the answer is yes.
Absolutely. Mark Padilla, St. Joseph's Church in La Puente, keep up the good work. May God richly bless you and your community. God love you. Thanks, Mark. Wow, that was an interesting little pitch in the Terry and Jesse Show. We've never had a Catholic school come on like that. That is terrific. Again, it's St. Joseph's Parish in La Puente, and I'll tell you, Mark Padilla is an on-fire Catholic. He's a Knight of Columbus, 4th degree, and he's just a good man. Okay, let's go back to our topic that we were talking about, is Padre Pio. I just told you an unbelievable miracle when I was at the canonization of Padre Pio. I have Dr. Ed Mazza, professor at Azusa Pacific University in Azusa, California, on the line. He's an expert on Padre Pio. Dr. Mazza, can you tell us a little bit about some of the trials Padre Pio had in regards to his priesthood? And he was such an obedient man. Can you tell us some more of these stories that maybe many of our listeners have never heard before?
Sure. Well, Padre Pio, as I said, they stopped him from having public masses at one point. These bad priests, and they went to the Vatican and tried to cause trouble against him. And they even deprived him of his own spiritual director, with whom he was very close and who knew his soul, and he had to be parted from him. And, excuse me, but the people of San Giovanni, where the chapel, where the monastery was, the mayor got the people together, and he told the cardinals that if Padre Pio had to leave San Giovanni Rotondo for a just reason, we would accompany him from town with music and banners. But if he must leave as one guilty of a crime at the instigation of an immoral, belligerent, and dishonest clergy who would continue to corrupt our population after banishing a holy priest, then, Your Eminence, I will throw away the insignia of my office, because he was the mayor, and in order to take Padre Pio away, you will have to trample on our dead bodies.
Wow.
So, sometimes the people, they have to rally around a good priest when he's under persecution. And
Absolutely.
Actually, one person went too far. There was one guy who was a little touched in the head because at one point when Padre Pio was about to put the consecrated host into a monstrance,
yes,
a guy actually comes up to Padre Pio and puts a revolver to his head and says, either dead or alive, you're going to stay with us in this town. Can you imagine?
Okay. I can. Can you imagine that? Put that in your mind right now. A guy putting a gun to Padre Pio's head saying that. That's shocking. I mean, that's actually documented. I know that, but it's still shocking to hear that, Dr. Mazza. Wow. Let me mention one more thing about Padre Pio and what he says in his letters, that he's written so many letters. I want you to remember to tell us about St. John Paul II writing to Padre Pio and what Padre Pio told him. That's fascinating after the break. Would you do that, Dr. Ed, later? Great. This is a letter that he wrote. No matter how great the trial to which the Lord has subject you to, no matter how unbearable your spiritual desolation at certain moments of your life, never lose heart. That's Padre Pio. Have recourse with more childlike trust to Jesus, who will never be able to resist bestowing on you some little solace and comfort. Turn to him at all times, even when the devil tries to cast over your life by showing you your sins and lifting up your voice loudly to him, and let you express your spiritual humility, your heartful contrition, and your vocal prayer. It is truly that God's power triumphs over everything. Be humble, and suffering prayers prevail over God himself. That's his letter. Hey, we're going to come back and tell you about another story of Padre Pio that's going to blow you away. You won't want to miss it. If you want to get that free DVD on evangelization, call 877-526-2151. We'll be right back.
For today's giveaway, call 877-526-2151. You're listening to The Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio. To join the show, call 888-914-9149. Here's Terry and Jesse.
This is Terry Barber. Jesse's out of town today. I've got my good friend Dr. Ed Mazza in studio with me. We're talking about the life of Padre Pio because his feast day's tomorrow. I teased you at the break saying that there's a couple letters and comments about St. John Paul II and his dialogue with St. Padre Pio, and also some other personal experiences with Padre Pio and St. John Paul II. Dr. Ed, could you share those stories with our listeners?
Yes, John Paul had a beloved old friend from Poland. Her name was Wanda I'm going to butcher this now, Poltowalska. And she had a terrible condition going on in her intestines, and her condition was urgent. And so on November 17th, 1962, Pope John Paul, who at that time was Bishop Carol Wojtyła, he wrote a letter to Padre Pio asking for his prayers for her. And basically his prayers were answered. The note was given to was brought to San Giovanni Rotondo, where Padre Pio was. There he found the priest seated with his head bowed over his chest, engrossed in prayer. The messenger held out the envelope, explaining that it dealt with a pressing matter. And without moving, Padre Pio simply said, "Open it and read it." And he listened in silence as Angelo Battisti read the letter. And then Battisti was surprised that this urgent letter seemed to be, anyway, long story short, Pope John Paul's friend, Dr. Wanda, she recovered and she was cured. And it's a cure, a double cure, you might say, the intercession of St. Padre Pio and the intercession of St. John Paul II.
That's amazing. Amazing stories. And isn't there another story that the Pope was kind of told he went to confession to St. Padre Pio? Is that a fair statement? The St. John Paul II, when he was a priest, he went to confession, and I think St. John Paul, the Padre Pio had mentioned that this man is going to be the Pope, and that's what the word I got on that. So amazing stories. You know, Dr. Mazza, you're an expert on history. I know you've written the first 500 years, 1,000 years history on CD for us. We have those CDs available for people who like church history. They can get them from just calling 877-526-2151. But I'd like to shift gears now. This is the 500th anniversary coming, since the Reformation, where Martin Luther had started all this. And so I wanted to have an understanding, a fair understanding, of what Martin Luther really believed and taught 500 years ago, because a lot of it became the basis of evangelical Christianity and Protestantism. So can you share a little biography of Martin Luther so that our listeners have a little grasp of who he was and what he believed in?
Well, Martin Luther was a Catholic priest, but in 1517, he was also a Catholic monk, just like Padre Pio. He was a monk and he was a priest. But in 1517, he left his Catholic faith to promote his own teaching. He promoted two teachings which are now the basis of all Protestant or evangelical Christianity. And the first one is justification or salvation by faith alone, that is to say, without works. This was actually something that had been condemned earlier in church history by St. Augustine. I could give you a brief quote from both men and
Sure.
see the difference between the two of them.
You bet.
So, in his Babylonian captivity of the church, Luther said, "See how rich is a Christian, the one who is baptized. Even if he wants to, he cannot lose his salvation, however much he sin, unless he will not believe. For no sin can condemn him except unbelief alone." So basically, Luther told people, go out and sin boldly, but believe more boldly still. As long as you have the gift of faith, you'll be saved. That's heresy.
Wow.
Because,
more
than 1,000 years, earlier, St. Augustine had said the following: "It is believed, moreover, by some that men who do not abandon the name of Christ, and who have been baptized, and who have never been cut off from the church, though they should live in the grossest sin and never wash it away in penitence, nor redeem it by almsgiving, but persevere in it persistently to the last day of their lives, shall be saved." And he goes on to say that the people who believe this, they're led astray. And he says, I explain this in my book on faith and works. So here you have St. Augustine, the doctor of the church, who wrote a book called Faith and Works. And then over 1,000 years later, you've got Martin Luther, an apostate Catholic priest, apostate Catholic monk, who went around teaching that it's faith alone, not works. Works not involved.
Well, Dr. Mazza, what about the topic of free will? You know, we have the only value in saying yes to God is you have freedom to say no. What was Martin Luther's position on free will?
Basically, Martin Luther's denied free will. He wrote a book in which it's called The Slavery of the Will. And in fact, he told a contemporary of his, a guy named Desiderius Erasmus, who had criticized his point on this. I'm glad that you brought this up, Erasmus, because you haven't bothered me with those extraneous issues, those trivial issues like purgatory and the papacy. You've struck at what is the essential point. Wow, because normally when people hear the history of the Reformation, they hear that, oh, well, Luther was against corruption in the church. They were corrupt popes. Or Luther was against the sale of indulgences, and he was against purgatory. But while those things may have kindled his initial dissent, it's actually, according to his own writings, it was actually his view of human nature. So in his view of human nature, Adam and Eve so corrupted us because of original sin that we no longer have free will, and we no longer have the ability to reason whatsoever. And therefore, that's why he believes in this doctrine of faith alone, because he didn't believe that we still have the gift of free will, and we still have the gift of using our reason. Although in the Catholic tradition, they're impaired, and we need God's grace. But so he rejected the Catholic tradition on these points, you know?
Sure. Well, let me ask you this, because it's fascinating to understand where he was coming from, but what did Martin Luther, what did he believe about the Mass? I mean, how much different, what changed his view on the Mass? How did he see it?
Martin Luther was the first person in nearly, by that point in history, 1,500 years of church history, to deny that the Mass is the sacrifice of Calvary. There were all kind of heresies floating around, but Luther was the first one to come out and say that the Mass is not a sacrifice. Here's a letter from Luther in which he says, if the Mass were not such an evil thing, I would introduce it again. Or as he says in the sermon of March 10th, 1522, the Mass is an evil thing, and God is displeased with it, because it is performed as if it were a sacrifice and a work of merit. Therefore, it must be abolished. Now, how different was Padre Pio? Padre Pio said about the Mass, he said, it is a sacred participation in the passion of Jesus. All that the Lord suffered in his passion, I suffer, to the extent that it is possible to be to a human being. And that is apart from any merit of mine, but it's entirely due to his goodness. And you see, this is the significance, Terry, of the fact that we're celebrating we're commemorating I won't say celebrating, we're commemorating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation at the same time as we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the miracle of the sun at Fatima and the Fatima message. And that is at Fatima, Jesus, through his mother, asked us, through the children, to participate in his passion, to participate in his suffering. Exactly what happened to Padre Pio in 1918, 1 year after the miracle of the sun, when God asked him to participate in the stigmata. And this is to counteract the false notion and the errors of Martin Luther, which then spread to the errors of Calvinism and Seventh-day Adventism and then Southern Baptists, whatever Protestant denomination you want to name. They don't believe, generally speaking, that we can participate in the passion of Jesus and that our sufferings can be used by God to save souls. You're only going to get that at a Catholic church, and that's what Jesus laid down to the apostles, because that's the church that Jesus established, the Catholic Church.
Amazing. I want to talk more about some of the doctrines, but I just have a minute. I understand that Martin Luther's relationship with his own father was very strained, and I'm wondering if that also had to get him a little mixed up on his faith, because I've been told that he also had some scrupulosity. Is that a fair statement, or is that something that is just hoopla? Is that true or false that he had some issues with that?
Yeah, again, quite the opposite of Padre Pio. Padre Pio always obeyed his spiritual director, and then later on, when he got so much trouble from certain bureaucrats in Rome, he also obeyed them. But to the contrary, Martin Luther, when he was an Augustinian monk, he wouldn't listen to his spiritual director. He was very scrupulous. Scrupulosity is something that some people suffer from, where they think that what they're doing is a sin when it's really not a sin. And so Luther would do these confessions in which he would confess all kind of stuff, these little tiny things that weren't even sins. And his confessor reportedly told him, Luther, you don't have to confess every little thing that's not a sin. And he wouldn't listen to his confessor. So what did Luther do? He drove himself to an extreme where you brought up his father. People don't realize, and psychologists tell us we don't realize how much our parents influence us in unconscious ways, right? So his father was very strict with him, and he could never please his father. And even when he became a monk, his father was really upset with him. And when he became a priest, he went to his first mass, but under protest, and he insulted him in front of everybody. So Luther always felt that he couldn't please his father, and that affected his theology.
Right. Dr. Ed, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to understand how Martin Luther influenced others to abandon the Holy Church. Want to hear about that? If you want to get that DVD on our evangelization, Becoming a Radioactive Catholic, it's 3 presentations by me on sharing your faith. Call 877-526-2151. We'll be back in a moment. Don't turn that dial.
For today's giveaway, call 877-526-20. Views expressed on the Terry and Jesse Show are for educational purposes only. Now here's Terry and Jesse.
This is Terry Barber. Jess Romero's out at a parish today, this weekend. I have my good friend Dr. Ed Mazza. We've been talking about Padre Pio, his feast days tomorrow. Both of us were at the canonization of Padre Pio. And we have Maria in Florida who has an interesting little tidbit about Padre Pio. Maria, welcome to the Terry and Jesse Show.
Hi, many blessings to all of you.
Amen.
Yes,
back to you.
I love Padre Pio.
Good.
Amen. I love Padre Pio. I got a big devotion to him. And I got to go to his shrine in Bartow, Pennsylvania, where you can order the oil. And if you use it with faith and love, trusting the intercession of Our Lady and Padre Pio Petrocina, is blessed by the Catholic priest and touched to the relic and the glove of St. Padre Pio, which they pray over us with that. And then he has a beautiful, beautiful after communion prayer that is called Stay With Me, Lord. I'm not going to go in details into it, but it's beautiful.
It is. I know the one. Maria, let me just ask you this. Your love for Padre Pio, are you sharing that with your friends and family also?
I do,
Good.
Because I got a big devotion to him.
Yeah.
And
you keep doing that, Maria, and I'm glad you called. I'm going to mention something with Dr. Mazza regarding Padre Pio's incorrupt body. And I think people will be shocked to hear that. So, Maria, thank you for your love for Padre Pio and our love for Jesus and Mary, and may God richly bless you. Thank you so much. Dr. Mazza, question. Is it true that Padre Pio's body is incorrupt? Because I've heard things on the Internet. Is that fake news or is it true? And what do we mean by incorrupt?
Well, that's what I heard too. And there are certain saints who, after they die, their body is miraculously preserved without any embalming or anything.
Yeah, and so Padre Pio's body is incorrupt. If you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, when I was there, it was before they dug him up. But it's true, and usually that's a sign. Like, I'll give you another saint, Saint Bernadette. I went to visit her in Navarre, in France, and her body is incorrupt. So, yeah, it's an amazing thing that happens to certain saints with their bodies. But, Dr. Mazza, let me ask you this about we're going to shift the last couple of minutes back to Martin Luther, showing the contrast of these two monks, Padre Pio, who happened to be a very loyal son of the church, and when persecution or anything came even from the church, he obeyed his superiors. And you got Martin Luther, and God bless him, but he did his own thing. So let me ask you this. How did Martin Luther influence others to abandon their Church of Christ? How did that work? What did he do to encourage everybody else to walk?
Well, first of all, his own example. He left the monastery, and then he married a nun. So he basically kind of made a mockery of his vows, But he spread, using the printing press, he spread his own doctrines or his own interpretation of the Bible. And he was very surprised when other people had their own interpretation of the Bible. For example,
Really?
Luther, while he rejected the nature of the Mass as a sacrifice, he still believed that Jesus was, physically present in the Eucharist. But there was another priest who left the priesthood, Ulrich Zwingli. I like saying his name. And Ulrich, he denied. He said it's just a symbol. It's not really Jesus. And they had a big debate. And so Luther was surprised to learn that he let the genie out of the bottle, and that other people were just as opinionated as he was. And then there was a guy named John Calvin, and he also agreed the Eucharist was more or less symbolic and not really real. And so what you began to have all these Catholics, and they were all baptized Catholics, and some of them were priests, leave the priesthood, leave their baptism, and start all these churches. These are churches created by men.
Wow. Dr. Mazza, I want to understand also the mind of Luther in regards to the Jews 500 years ago. How did he see the Jewish people in the realm of his faith?
Okay, well, I hope everybody's sitting down when they hear this.
They better be sitting
Luther
down.
wrote
Strong coffee right now. Yeah.
He wrote this quaint little book called The Jews and Their Lies. How does he start out? What shall we Christians do with this rejected and condemned people, the Jews? Well, first, let's set fire to their synagogues or schools, and then bury and cover with dirt whatever will not burn. Is this microphone on?
Yeah.
This is to be done in honor of our Lord. Is it to be done in honor of our Lord? Are you kidding me? And then he says that they should live in barns. Their houses should be destroyed as well. I'm not making this is not fake news, Jerry. I'm not making this up. This is what Luther, the founder of. This is what I mean. This guy could not possibly have been a prophet from God who led the people back to the true gospel. As a matter of fact, people credit him with restoring the Bible in the language of the people. The Bible was already translated into the language of the people in many countries, and also what he's also credited with giving more of the Bible to people. Did you know he actually took books out of the Bible?
Well, tell us what he did. Yeah, I want to. And some of the books he was really upset with. Which one really bothered him? The inspired Word of God. Which one?
Yeah, well, for example, he says. Let me see if I can find what he has to say about. He's infamous about the Old Testament, but let me tell you also what he thought about the New Testament. He said here, for example, he didn't like the Book of Revelation, the Apocalypse. He said, quote, "There are many things objectionable in this book. To my mind, it bears no marks of an apostolic or prophetic character. As for myself, I feel an aversion to it, and to me, this is sufficient reason for rejecting it."
Oh my gosh.
Because he doesn't like the book, that's sufficient reason for rejecting it. But I'll tell you why. Let me tell you why he rejected it. Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 12. Then another scroll was opened, the book of life. The dead were judged according to their... Can you fill in the blank? The dead were judged according to their works.
Yeah, you can't have that.
Chapter 20, verses 13 through 15. Yeah. The sea gave up its dead, then death and hell gave up their dead. All the dead were judged according to their works. And then death and hell were thrown into the pool of fire. So he also didn't like the letter of James. He said, I don't believe that it's authentic. He said it's an epistle of straw. I wonder what he has against James.
I can tell you.
14, 17, and 18. Yeah. Should I do it, or you'd like to?
Go ahead and do it. I love it because it's facts.
What does it profit, my brethren, though a man say he has faith and have not works? Can faith save him? Even so, faith, if it has not works, is dead, being alone. That's right, folks. The only time the Bible speaks about faith alone is to condemn it.
Right. And, Dr. Ed Mazza, Ken Hensley, who just came back from a trip to Germany with Steve Ray, did a series called The Rest of the Story. And he talks a lot about what we just covered, but much, much more. It's about 7 or 8 hours on the life of Martin Luther. I'm not here to beat up on Martin Luther. I'm just here to say, hey, here are the facts about him. And so I'm just a little concerned sometimes that we don't go back to history and look what they actually said, and we just kind of go with what we feel. And, feelings can deceive us. Facts can't. And the facts are what you just said about Martin Luther. And if you want to get a wonderful set on Martin Luther, just call 877-5 215-526-2151 and ask for the Ken Hensley set. He's got a couple of them on Luther. Dr. Mazza, let me ask you this. How should we Catholics approach the 500th anniversary of the Reformation? And can we go out and evangelize Lutherans and give them the fullness of the faith, or are we just going to pat them on the back? Which do you prefer?
Well,
Terry,
we've made... I like the way you phrase the question. I have to be careful how I answer because my chairman is Lutheran. I'm going to be kicked out of the history department.
Sure.
And in fact, in 3 weeks from now, at Azusa Pacific University, you're welcome to sign up for this. Folks are welcome to sign up. We're actually having a conference. We're having a scholarly conference. People are going to give talks on the Reformation because I teach at an evangelical school. But I'm actually on the Friday the 13th, on the anniversary of the Dance of the Sun at Fatima, I'm going to be giving a talk myself at this conference. And so I'm going to give you my take on it. As Catholics, there's many things that, of course, we agree with Protestants about.
Sure.
And we have Jesus, and they love Jesus, and we love Jesus, and that's a great starting point. But they have to understand that Jesus, the Jesus that Catholics believe in, I'm going to make sure I get this straight so I don't get kicked out of the Catholic Church as well. The Jesus that Catholics believe in is different from the Jesus that Protestants believe in. I'll say that again. The Jesus the Catholics believe in is different from the Jesus the Protestants believe in. The Jesus that Catholics believe in has a body, a living body, of which he is the head. And so you and I and Padre Pio and the little old lady down the street, we are his limbs. And so we can offer up our sufferings, and as long as we're in a state of grace, Jesus works through us, you see? In fact, Jesus even predicted in the Gospel of John, greater works than I, my disciples will do, because I go to the Father. So we have to dialogue with each other, but we have to stick to our truth. We can't deviate from truth.
Yeah, that's false ecumenism when we change our truths on it. Dr. Ed Mazza, thank you for joining us. We're going to give the set by Ken Hensley on Luther that gives the whole rest of the story on Martin Luther so that you're educated for this 500th anniversary. You can pick that up by calling 877-526-2151. Jesse Romero and myself will be back again on Monday. We just want to say, may God richly bless you and your family, and keep the faith, spread the faith, share the faith. I've got a DVD I'm giving away, the 10 Commandments of Evangelization, the 8 Laws of Effectively Sharing Your Faith. I'll even teach you how to share your personal testimony. Let's get out there, Catholics. Being a radioactive Catholic, get that set for free on DVD. 775262151. May God richly bless you and your family. See you on Monday.
For today's giveaway, call 877-526-2151.